we welcome back Fred Redmond. He is Secretary Treasurer of the 60 unions and 12.5 million members of the AFL-CIO. And on June 13th, 2022, he not just was elected, but it was unanimous to the position as the highest ranking African American officer in the history of the labor movement in this nation. Now, Secretary Redmond's path to the Federation's second highest office began back in 1973 when he went to work at Reynolds Metals Company in Chicago and became a member of the USW, the United Steelworkers. He was active in his local union almost immediately. He served as shop steward, eventually vice president. He served 3 terms as local president. And in 2021, he was elected president of the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas. That's an extremely prestigious post. It's also an international post. Now, you want to know more about him and more about the AFL-CIO? Check out the website, AFL-CIO.org. That's AFL-CIO.org. Their handle on Facebook, Instagram, and X is at AFL-CIO, and Secretary Redmond's handle on X is at St. Redmond, that's Secretary Treasurer. Secretary Redmond, more than a pleasure to have you back on the program, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Leslie, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Let's talk about choices, right? In 70 days, there will be a national election to replace our current president, and that will either be with the former president, Donald Trump, or with our current Vice President, Kamala Harris. For workers and for unions, because you are Secretary Treasurer of one of the largest unions, the AFL-CIO, representing and having the best interest of not only union, but union workers, specifically in AFL-CIO and all the various unions that come under that umbrella. Is it fair to say that as president, Donald Trump was a disaster for unions, was a disaster for workers, was a disaster for the working class because he was somebody who governed for people like him, his peers, the rich, blocked workers from protections, blocked workers from wages that they were owed. And if history repeats itself, right, Secretary Redmond? I mean, if he did all that, which he did, he'll do it again.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's never been in my lifetime, Leslie, such a wide contrast between the two candidates. I mean, Donald Trump's years as the president, our former president, thank God, was very, very critical years for the labor movement and for workers in general. I mean, we went through a period with Donald Trump where we saw unprecedented cuts in OSHA, cutting regulations in terms of safety inspections for workers around this country. You know, we literally had to fight. When I say we, the labor movement had to fight for funding for the NLRB because he cut so many workers from the NLRB. It was hard to get hearings and hard to get decisions on organizing drives that we had filed complaints against with the NLRB. So his presidency, over the 4 years he was president, did not serve workers well. He gave huge tax cuts, as we all know, to his billionaire friends at the expense of those workers at the bottom. So, you know, I was in Chicago for the convention, and one thing that, you know, I'll just share with your audience that came up and up over and over again, we're not going back there. And, you know, we have made it clear at the AFL-CIO through our 60 affiliate unions that we're just not going back there, and we're going to hold the largest voter mobilization program in the history of the American labor movement because his candidacy is just that critical in terms of being a disaster for working people.
And when we talk about the former president, we also have to look at the composite of Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate. Forecast right now, sadly, it looks good for Kamala Harris as president, doesn't look so good for Democrats to hold the House and to hold the Senate. How important are those races for union issues and workers' issues and worker rights when it comes down to a Democrat or a Republican candidate in these various House and Senate races, especially those that are very close or up for grabs?
Well, it's very critical that we have a labor-friendly, controlled Congress and a labor-friendly Senate in order for us to pass the much-needed legislation that's going to be needed in order to move this agenda for working families. And
Right.
Vice President Harris has an agenda to put workers first, but we cannot get there unless we have the votes in the Congress and the House. So what we're doing is we're encouraging our members by talking to them at the workplace, at their homes, during the phone calls, but we're not just focused on the national election. We're trying to get labor-friendly candidates voted up and down the ballot. I think we have a good opportunity in this election to take back the House and to make Hakeem Jeffries the Speaker of the House. And we got some tough races in the Senate. But if we do our job and if our voters show up, then I think we got a good shot to maintain control over the Senate. So the prospects look good, Leslie. It comes down to people understanding the contrast, the difference between not just these two candidates, but these two parties. Because if we get Kamala Harris in the White House, which we intend to, then the only way that we're going to be able to access her agenda and fight for her agenda, which is a working families agenda, is by making sure that we have the votes in both houses to get the agenda through.
Absolutely. And, her current boss, President Joe Biden, he has been the most worker friendly, union friendly president, I would say, in the history of the United States. And
Right.
she's made it clear that, this is the Biden Harris administration, and she doesn't seem to be deviating from the path and the goals that the current President Joe Biden has and has had and has illustrated. Not just, with infrastructure, legislation and getting parties on both sides of the aisles coming together for the best interest of the working people and union working people.
No, that's correct. And she has made it clear that she continued to do the work of the Biden-Harris administration by making sure that, we continue to keep funding the infrastructure program, the CHIPS and Science Act. All of these things are on the table in this election, that we can't go backwards. We have to move these sort of programs forward, which has created millions of jobs throughout this country. And she's also committed to passing the PRO Act, Protect Our Right to Organize, that will nationally eliminate focus group meetings and threats and intimidations to workers who elect to organize a union. And she's also very much committed to worker safety and health on the job. And she got a program where she talks about beefing up the OSHA program and putting more inspectors out in the field and workshops to make sure that people are working in a safe environment every day. So this is a president who's as committed as Joe Biden in terms of standing up and standing for and standing beside working families. And Leslie, you are exactly right. Joe Biden is by all aspects the most worker-friendly president that I've seen in my lifetime. And, we have all love and respect for Joe Biden and the work that he have done. And, Kamala Harris has been side by side with him along the way. It was Kamala Harris who cast the deciding vote that saved our pension plans, coming out of COVID. So she knows us, we know her, and we're excited about her continuing this work.
And to that point, the AFL-CIO was at the Democratic convention. You were, President Schuler, interesting first female leader of a union, supporting hopefully first female leader of this country as a woman. It would be nice to be able to say we've at least had one chick in charge in the U.S., right? The AFL-CIO has come out supporting Kamala Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz. And it's not just because they're Democrats, because people think, oh, unions always support Democrats. It's not because they're Democrats. It's because these two people have, with that, whether on a national level or her fighting in the state Senate for the state of California, or Governor Tim Walz for his state of Minnesota, they're fighting every day to lift up working people. Correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And when you look at the two records of all four of the candidates, the presidential candidate on both sides and the vice presidential candidates, there's no comparison. I mean, Vice President Harris, yeah, I mean, she has been a partner with the current president in terms of pushing forward a workers-friendly agenda and not afraid to use the word union. And you can just look at the work that Tim Walz has done in Minnesota, working with organized labor, working with workers, and there's not a comparison. So what we do is we look at candidates' records before we make an endorsement. And the difference between these two parties in terms of their vice president and presidential candidates is very stark. Okay, it's very different. And, we held a meeting of our executive council, our 60 presidents, within 24 hours when the president bravely stood aside and got out of the race. And within 24 hours, we got a unanimous endorsement from our 60 affiliate unions to endorse this ticket of Harris Walz.
Yeah, and no surprise, because both Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz, like you said, they fight every day to lift up working people. You mentioned the vice president being a key partner in the most pro-labor administration in our lifetime, and most people's lifetime, if not all of history in the United States, and she will continue. They will continue to do that, but focusing on Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And let's do that. In Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, cumulatively, labor is close to 20% of voters. Unions have a 70% union favorability. So, Secretary Redmond, question: why aren't we seeing, first with Joe Biden and now with Kamala Harris, bigger numbers supporting this Harris Walz tickets, knowing that unions have 70% union favorability and knowing that she's part of the most worker-friendly pro-union presidency in our lifetime, administration in our lifetime?
Well, we have work to do. We have work to do. When you talk about the close to 20% that we have in that blue wall amongst them three states you're talking about, when you layer over, okay, our 70%, then, in terms of workers in those states, she's up 15 points. When you take that 20% away, she's down 2 points amongst all workers in those three states that you referenced, the blue wall. So we have work to do, because what we need to do and what we are doing, okay, we need to lay out the record. We need to lay out the record and really, really talk to our members and explain to them the difference between these candidates. Look, we are not a monolithic union, okay, when it comes to how our members vote. We've seen a lot of our members, so-called, that old saying, drunk the Kool-Aid. So many of our members have followed the MAGA philosophy, so to speak, in the last couple of elections. But we see a remarkable sense of people coming back home and starting to vote in their best interest. President Schuler was telling the story where she was recently on a picket line, and the gentleman walked up to her and said, he had on a MAGA hat. He walked up to her and said, look, just because we're in different parties, I want to talk to you. Okay, I want to talk to you because we both support the union. So it's a feeling out there that people feel as though the most trusted source of information, I'm talking about our members, feel as though the most trusted source of information that they get in terms of the news media comes from their union. So what we have to do is go back to basics, and we have to have one-on-one conversations, with our members. And before we talk about who we are endorsing, we talk about issues. We talk about, who's going to fight for trade laws that's going to help us maintain an industrial manufacturing base here in America. We need to talk about the effects. And Leslie, for some reason, we have not done a perfect job. And I think some of that blame goes to the White House too, because a lot of our members do not understand the impact that some of the legislation that this president signed have meant to their communities and have meant to really lift young people up, such as the CHIPS and Science, the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. And we have to talk to our members and get them to understand what's at stake in this election.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, the blue wall was built by labor, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
union leaders have framed Vice President Harris as champion of the working class. The first night of the DNC, this is what President Schuler said, quote, union leaders championed Vice President Kamala Harris as the choice for working class folks in a series of speeches on opening night. And she said, quote, this election is about two economic visions.
Right.
And it clearly is, right? I mean, and you're right, though, because the White House hasn't touted their success at the border. I mean, more than 30% reduction border crossing every month that goes down since January. Bidenomics, they're not saying loud enough. We have had now what, 4 highest stock market days. One of them was yesterday. And then right to the, working class issues. Those pieces of legislation that weren't just drafted by Republicans were passed by Republicans. Joe Biden signed it to law and allow the, not just passage, but payment of that legislation, by Democrats, not Republicans. I think I said Republicans. Not enough coffee today. Secretary Treasurer Redmond, final word, just a few seconds left, sir, to this point.
Well, we're starting to see a lot of our members, Leslie, come back home. And when I say come back home, we're starting to see a lot of our members who, in the past couple of elections, may have drifted over, to the Republican side. We're starting to see more enthusiasm. More of our members are starting to come back home because more and more of our members realize the difference between these two candidates and what it means, not just for their unions, not just for their immediate families, but for their entire communities. So this election is going to be hard fought, and we're going to be in the thick of the fight. We're going to be swinging all the way. As I stated earlier, this will be the largest ground game in the history of the American labor movement, unless we're fighting for a good cause, because we're fighting to save and grow the middle class in America. We're excited.
Absolutely. Very well said. I am too. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer Fred Redmond. He is Secretary Treasurer of the 60 unions and 12.5 million members, 12.5 million of the AFL-CIO. Please follow him on X at ST Redmond, Secretary Treasurer Redmond, and go to the AFL website. There's a plethora of information there, AFL-CIO.org. And also like them, on Facebook and Instagram, and follow them on Instagram and X at AFL-CIO. I'm Leslie Marshall. Thank you to Secretary Treasurer Redmond, to the AFL, to all of you watching, all of you listening.